Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is now clear and unambiguous. Germany is becoming a party to the war. Russia is sending a warship. NATO is on high alert. More on these dramatic developments in this video, and with that, a warm welcome, dear friends, to this latest edition of Germany Today 1. Germany is now effectively a party to the war. A Russian destroyer is positioned off our coast. NATO ships are facing off in a tense standoff, and in Latvia, ministers are being forced to resign because drones are flying over NATO territory toward Russia. While here in Germany, we're being told everything's under control. No escalation, purely defensive. Today, we're going to look at the fatal damage the traffic light coalition and large parts of the CDU are doing to German security and why Germany is stepping closer to an open conflict with a nuclear power. Stay tuned. This directly affects your safety, that of your family, and that of our country. And Pistorius, the much-praised defense politician who's at the top of the polls with voters, or let's call him the war minister, is turning Germany into an arms production hub within the context of the Ukraine war. Let's start with the news that's being sold as a major success in the mainstream media. Defence Minister Boris Pistorius was in Ukraine again, unannounced. But he didn't just promise a few tanks, he massively expanded German-Ukrainian arms cooperation. What does that mean in concrete terms? Germany and Ukraine want to jointly develop new high-tech weapons. The main focus is on unmanned systems, meaning drones, with ranges of, listen closely now, up to 1,500 kilometers, capable of striking deep into the Russian heartland. This is no longer just defense at the front lines. These are offensive long-range capabilities, specifically intended to strike Russian territory. At the same time, the federal government has a 10-point plan that codifies exactly this cooperation. Joint ventures, shared production sites, billions in German taxpayer money to build up the Ukrainian arms industry, and to do so permanently. In other words, Germany is not only becoming a weapons supplier, but an extended arm of the Ukrainian defense industry. The weapons produced here or in joint factories are intended to be used tomorrow in the war against Russia. And all of this is happening without any serious broad public debate in Germany. There was no referendum, no real fundamental discussion in the Bundestag, no open weighing of the risks for our country. Instead, this policy was pushed through step by step in backrooms, in government statements and press conferences where neither critical questions nor other objections could be raised. And we really have to say what that is. This is war policy without a mandate from the people, period. I repeat, this is war policy without a mandate from the people. A government that does not honestly inform its own people about the risks of war, in my opinion and that of millions of people who stand behind me on this issue, forfeits all moral legitimacy and any qualification. And now I ask you the question, how will Moscow assess this situation? For Russia, this is no longer a neutral third country that is just supplying. From the Kremlin's perspective, Germany is becoming part of the war machinery. Anyone who helps develop, co-finance, and produce weapon systems that have an impact deep into Russia is in the crosshairs, whether the German government likes it or not. And the Russian destroyer of Fehmarn, the island. Russia, or rather the war, is moving to our doorstep. Parallel to this situation I have just described, a military spectacle is taking place right on our doorstep, which is usually only briefly reported in the news, if at all. Off Fehmarn, that is, off the German Baltic Sea coast, a Russian destroyer is in position. Officially, it is said that the ship is securing Russian tankers and freighters belonging to the so-called shadow fleet, i.e., ships that circumvent sanctions and transport Russian oil. But let's be honest, when a Russian destroyer equipped with state-of-the-art weapon systems cruises directly off the German coast, it sends a very clear message. Russia is showing we are here. We can respond at any time. NATO in turn is reacting by sending its own warships into the Baltic Sea. German frigates are patrolling there. The situation is being described as tense but under control. But what happens if an incident occurs? A collision, for example, a false radar identification, a shoot-down that is later sold as an accident, and suddenly NATO and Russia are no longer just facing each other on paper, but in a real line of fire. That is exactly the price of this policy of escalation. While politicians in Berlin rave about strategic partnership, Russian and NATO ships stand armed to the teeth off our coast. The danger of an uncontrollable spark igniting a conflict increases every day, and no one asks the citizens if they are willing to bear this risk. This is exactly where security policy turns into pure warmongering. Instead of focusing all efforts on de-escalation, diplomacy, and mediation, there is constant rearmament, deployment, and provocation, until both sides are so close to each other that one mistake is enough. And why? Because a weak, fractured government coalition wants to hide its own domestic political problems behind foreign policy toughness. They want to demonstrate strength toward Russia because they no longer have any strength in their own country. Not in the economy, not in border protection, not on the issue of internal security. And then we come to the case of Latvia, the drones, and a look into the future of Germany. We can currently see in Latvia how quickly this policy backfires. Drones have entered NATO airspace there, specifically Ukrainian drones, and some of them have crashed. And the defense minister in Latvia has now had to resign. Officially, there is talk of a failure in air defense. Unofficially, however, the question remains, how closely intertwined are Ukrainian operations, drone flights, and NATO infrastructure by now? Apparently, a single drone incident in one's own airspace is enough today to make a government falter. And now I am asking you, if such incidents happen in Latvia, how long will it take before something similar occurs over Poland, over the Baltic Sea, and directly over German sovereign territory? If Germany is simultaneously an arms production site, a financier, and the political engine of this Ukraine policy, then the step from being a supporting nation to becoming a de facto party to the war is nothing more than a formality. Critics have been warning about this exact scenario for years, from parts of the AfD to formerly conservative voices that hardly exist in the CDU today. Instead of diplomacy, disarmament, and national security, it is about geopolitical symbolic politics, about moral self-exaltation because common sense is lacking, paid for with your money and, in the worst case, with the security of your country. Meanwhile, the welfare state is crumbling. Billion-euro packages for weapons, arms deals, and special funds are being waved through in record time without rhyme or reason. But when it comes to pensioners, to families, to care, to infrastructure, or to affordable energy, then suddenly they say there is no money available for that. This policy eats its way directly into your everyday life. Higher taxes, higher levies, expensive energy, fewer benefits, but more risk of becoming a target in a conflict you never wanted to be part of. The welfare state and prosperity are being sacrificed to finance foreign policy adventures that have less and less to do with the interests of their own citizens. In the end, you have to decide for yourself. Do you want a Germany that acts in your interest, or a Germany that acts as a player in war while your prosperity and social security are slowly being eaten away? We have not had a real debate about whether Germany should become an arms production site for your war or for a war with a nuclear power. We have not had an honest discussion about whether we are willing to cut back on the welfare state, infrastructure, and internal security in favor of ever new war packages. That is exactly why we must force this debate into the public eye now. My call to you is clear. Ask your representatives in writing whether they want to make Germany a party to the war and publish the answers. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues about what's happening right now instead of just swallowing the headlines. Draw your own conclusions at the next election. Support the parties that credibly stand against warmongering, for diplomacy, and for the protection of our social welfare state. If we just let all of this unfold, everything that's developing right now, this government will just keep going because it's so stupid and incompetent. Step by step, weapon by weapon, escalation by escalation, because it lacks the peaceful means and the qualifications. That's why you shouldn't stay passive. Use your voice, your reach, your vote, and tell me in the comments, do you think that Germany finally needs an open debate about war risks, costs, and the welfare state? Yes or no? And what specifically do you expect from the next federal government so that Germany can once again prioritize peace, security, and prosperity? I'll see you in the next video. Stay critical, stay vigilant, and don't let anyone convince you that war is the only solution. Yours, Bertolt Gies.